This is James Walker. Welcome to Real Talk, Real People. This is the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people to hear what they have to say about the issues and problems we face as a society. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You know, guns are a problem across the United States. I don't think there's anyone who has any doubt about that. And here in Connecticut, it is no different. While we don't have mass shootings, thank God the last and only mass shooting we have had here was the unfortunate incident at Sandy Hook. Well, Connecticut is doing something to strengthen its gun laws. My guest today is a member of Connecticut's legislature, and he's here to talk about some of the legislations they just pushed through to keep Connecticut streets safer. Let's get him on the show and hear what he has to say.
My name is Anthony Nolan. I'm a state representative for the 39th District, which is New London, Connecticut. Recently retired police officer for 23 years and now a full-time state representative for New London in the state of Connecticut.
Good. And I was reading an opinion piece that you had written about SROs in school. And I also saw an interview with you when you were talking about gun violence. And I said, let me reach out to this guy because I very seldom get people from that side of Connecticut. All my guests seem to be from, Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, and so forth. So this is it's very welcoming to have you here. What seems to be the problem here in Connecticut with gun violence? We don't have mass shootings, but we haven't had one, I should say, in quite a while. But we do have a lot of individuals who are being shot pretty much, it seems, every day, though I know it's not every day. And it just doesn't seem to get the reaction and the impact of these mass shootings. And I'm wondering, is it because it's one by one as opposed to 20 at a time? What are your feelings on that?
Gun violence, as you said, is an issue everywhere.
Right.
And whether we have mass shootings or not, we need to, I think, have laws that protect us from being in situation as those that have had mass shootings. So the stricter we can make our gun laws to keep people safe and to make sure that the right people have their hands on guns. It's a tricky balance though, because sometimes when you make the gun law stronger, you take away from those that are maybe not having the issues with guns. So it's a balance, and sometimes it's not fair, but in order to make society safe, sometimes you have to bite your tongue and you have to agree with some of the things that come up in legislature in regards to protection from guns. So we have quite a bit of shootings in southeastern Connecticut. Also, not being as big as a city as Bridgeport or New Haven, where there are larger issues, or Hartford. But there's enough that goes on that I think stricter gun laws are the best way to go.
And when you say stricter gun laws, what would you like to see? What would you like to see our gun laws reflect?
Well, recently we just passed legislation on a little tougher, limiting the amount of handguns you can buy in a 30-day period. Generally people could carry, firearms with the intent to display. We changed that up where you can't just carry it to display it now.
Right.
And that's where, that's that balance that people have a problem with, because there's people who carry them that don't do things wrong with them.
Right. They're responsible gun owners.
They're responsible gun owners. But unfortunately, sometimes that brings unrest into some situations. It might not be intentional all the time, but sometimes people see people carrying guns, and it creates the anxiety. And and again, it's unfortunate that that happens in those situations, but there's a lot of places that don't want to have guns come into our facility, or they want to be able to control whether someone can display a gun in their restaurant. And that's some of the things that were discussed in the legislation. Um, it does requirements for trigger laws and safe storage. Those are things that were pushed a little harder this year. Um, let's see, training credentials. I think that is another thing that was looked at in this legislation. A stricter release condition for when people are penalized by some kind of gun violence, that there's a stricter release condition on them.
I
Just
think
try and go ahead, sir.
if I'm not mistaken, you went from 10% bail to 30% bail. I think that was
Yes, sir.
one of the things.
Yeah.
And that is something that I, as a citizen, question.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that everybody has rights. I understand that. But if we have someone who has been charged or has been arrested and charged multiple times with gun violence, why do we give them bail at all? And again, I
That's
know it's a tricky question because of the way our laws work, but it just seems to me.
Yeah, and see, and those are the caveats, unfortunately, that it becomes very debating on the floor of the House becomes very lengthy.
Mhm,
Um,
I'm sure.
some people don't want the drawn out debates. And some people don't. Some not all leadership, but some leadership says, okay, we have to agree to disagree, minimize how much time we're going to spend on something, and then we have to be fair. So unfortunately, with a great percentage of House of Representatives wanting to see a stricter uh, law when it comes to that. And then you have some who say, wait a minute, um, that's going to hit the brown and black community a
Black
little
community,
harder than it is other communities. So let's hold on a minute. And that unfortunately was where the balance came, where everybody agreed on it in order to kind of make it bipartisan, as they say. Um, the crazy thing about being bipartisan sometimes in Connecticut, legislature now, the Democrats have most of the say.
right?
And my thing, well, if we're going to pass laws, um, and we have the majority of the say, then why are we worried about making a deal?
Correct.
You know, if
But
if we if we want to say, okay, we might want to make stricter gun law penalties, but when it comes to an opportunity for someone to have bond and be able to afford it at a different amount, well, that's what a lot of people question, because brown and black folk that don't have a lot of money or can't get the access to money like our European brothers
right,
and sisters, that's not fair. But then you turn around and you say, okay, now it's a stricter penalty. Well, does somebody with more money now have a better opportunity to get some legal help than someone who doesn't? So it's one of those damned if you do and you're damned if you
and you're
don't.
damned if you don't.
But the focus, I think, was protecting people. So, that's what the debate rested at.
Right. And quite frankly, as a citizen, that's you want to feel that your leaders are taking up issues and passing laws that protect you as a citizen, but at the same time does not violate, people's rights.
Mhm.
How bad is this gun situation here in Connecticut? Bad as compared to the rest of the nation?
Um, we might not be as a high percentage, but I say, for me and for those that came to me in regards to gun safety, um, it's enough to make people want to call us. And it's
Right.
enough to make people, even on my street, there's been numerous shootings and um, uh, related to death, and then some just crazy guys that are out there, you know, challenging one another. Um, I mean, it's to a point where something had to be done, and I don't even know if what we did was. I don't even think what we did was enough. I think we have to come up with some mechanism that says, look, if you're willing to shoot at somebody, that means you're willing to hurt them seriously.
That's the way I look at it.
Okay.
That's the way I look at it.
You know, but then there's the other side where, okay, that person did something serious enough for someone to go after him with a gun. Was it something that should have a consideration when it comes time for that person to be penalized?
Penalized, correct.
Was that person a first time, you know, uh, uh, you know,
Offender.
a first time offender? So now it's a first time offender. He has no history. So will those gun laws be fair to him if someone else who's done it 3 and 4 times, so that balance, again, it comes to that balance.
What I wonder about, and what I've always been concerned about, is if you have a gun, and I will put myself in this same general category. If I had a gun and someone really just did something to me that was just so egregious, or harmed somebody that I loved, if I had the gun on me, my first instinct may be to pull out the gun and shoot. But if I don't have the gun on me, my first instinct would be to say contact police or go about this in a more, you know, legal matter. And I'm just wondering if you don't have the gun, because I don't go with this, guns don't kill people. Well, if you don't have the gun, you can't shoot, as
Right.
far as I'm concerned, and you don't give in to that quick instinct. I mean, or that quick rage, that quick anger to boom, boom, boom. So, you know, I'm wondering if more education, maybe, or do we have a
And
situation where we need to get out into the streets with these young people and catch them young and educate them about guns? Because quite frankly, in our community, in the Black community, guns carry a different message than it does in the white community, where guns have been on people's mantelpieces since the Wild West, so to
mhm.
speak. So there's a difference. Do you think
Well,
education would
we,
help us?
we we definitely do not educate brown and black folk enough
Right.
in relation to how serious having a gun is. And back when I grew up, we used to see videos of people who were shot and what it does. And it just surprises me that there are not training videos out there in some of our schools. And if there
I
are,
agree.
I'd like to be invited to the school to see that, because I like to make sure that it goes to other schools. But we don't see the damages that guns can do when you're reckless. And we also don't see the penalties in which you are that you can get, and what it looks like when you get those penalties. There's no follow through.
Right.
Um, but again, it goes back to, is it a first time offender, or is it someone who's in a revolving door doing these things? And should we treat everyone the same when it comes to gun violence, or should we have
Take it
those
case by case.
case by case basis? Well, there's a lot of people that think don't matter what, everybody should be treated the same. If you take out a gun and you use it on somebody, you should get the same penalty. The penalty should stick, and if you do it again, the penalty should grow.
I'm not so
That's
sure I agree with that. I think you have
it.
to look at
I,
case by case, because
yeah,
I just think it'd be unfair. It'd be like being a veteran and going to the hospital, veterans hospital, and one size fits all, and you have to kind of
yeah.
let them know, hey, I'm an individual. This is So no, I agree with you. You have to
But
do it as
that those are the debates we have on the House floor, where there are people who think that someone who shoots a gun for whatever reason the first time, someone gets injured or someone doesn't get injured. Well, let's look at it. And then you have some people, no, there's no looking at it because this is what he did. he should know he needs to be, or she needs to be responsible. When you have a gun, that puts you in a different standard of responsibility. So if you're wilding, as the kids say, and you go and get the gun or you use the gun on somebody, that means that you didn't have the standard of responsibility that you needed to have the gun in the first
In
place.
the first place.
So
What is
now, you know,
good?
that now someone's, and there's that side that says, okay, because that person lost the ability to keep themselves to a certain standard, they need a penalty that they're going to have to understand that this is what happens when you do that.
And what I once wrote a column about a young man, and I won't go into the whole thing, but the thing was he was carrying a gun for protection. He had no intention on using it. He didn't have a record or anything, but he was so afraid living where he was living that he carried a gun just strictly for protection. And
Yeah.
so I asked him, I said, well, if that's the case, you have no record or anything. Why don't you do this legally? So that if you're stopped by the police, you are carrying a gun legally. But for some odd reason, many in our community are, I don't know, they're afraid to go that legal route, or maybe they think the light is going to be shining on them if they go. I don't know.
Well,
what would
I,
you
I,
think?
I think I think I think that is the truth in many ways, where um, people that go to get guns in our community, in the Black and Brown
Mm-hmm.
community, feel like that sometimes they're identified, and they just happen to run into that officer that says, "You carrying your gun, or you got a gun?" And then you say, "Well, how'd you know I had a gun?" Without either doing a check on them or without
Right.
knowing that, hey, that kid went to the police department to get a permit, and as soon as he got his permit, his name got put on a list to say, hey, just
Right.
in case you come by this person, you know, I'm not saying that happened with me and our town, but there are towns where that does happen.
And it
Um,
happens frequently. I can tell you as a journalist, I know that happened. That happened quite frequently when, I got reports across my desk and I go, whoa, this couldn't have happened. Couldn't have
yeah.
happened this way.
So I
So
mean, there are always those times where just because you got arrested for something before, now you're being identified as someone,
identified
so now your name goes on, or even if it doesn't go on a list, it's the mentality that officer keeps sometimes.
keeps
And it's,
up times.
and I
Right.
got to say, not all officers, because those that might see this are going to say, oh, he's talking bad about officers. No, it's not that. It's the
No,
fact that it happens in our
it
country,
happens. Yes, it does.
and I'm not scared to say that it happens, because that's what goes on.
Yeah, and I think
People,
we all know that
yeah,
this is what goes on. And I'm wondering because it just seems that these shootings or people carrying guns, they seem to be getting younger. And I've been in situations where I'm talking kids 13, 14, 15 years old,
yeah,
and all their conversation is about violence. Who's in jail? Who got shot? Who's getting out?
yeah.
And I'm wondering, how can we reverse this conversation? I take public transportation. I hear it pretty much every day. How do we reverse that kind of conversation in our communities and let our young, because it just seems that, I want to hear them talking about Paris. I want to hear them talking about, you know, going to college, different things. I just don't want to hear about the gun violence and so forth. How do we turn that conversation around?
We prioritize wrong in a lot of our communities. Education and marketing for those things as such are very low.
That's correct.
Having community groups to talk about it. Someone had mentioned something to me today about a men to boys group that's meeting up on the weekend now. And they said, well, why haven't you been there? And I said, unfortunately, I have legislative duties that I had to do. But now, hopefully, it is calming down. More groups can start up, and I can take part in those things. I do have a big relationship with a lot of the youth in our communities, along with other coaches and teachers that come out of the buildings that they work at and try and make that connection with youth to try and keep them busy and occupied enough so they're not doing those things.
Doing those things is correct.
So it's educating them, and it's having the communication with them in regards to the seriousness of things, as we were talking about earlier. We don't do that enough. And unfortunately, we have a lot of households with either one parent
Oh,
or
man,
two parents that have to work to afford to have the household that they're in that doesn't give their kids the supervision that they
that
need.
they need. All the
Um,
time.
or the time.
All the time that they need. And
Yeah.
I so agree
Yeah,
with that.
our community's failure to try and help pick up the slack, um, to try and occupy or help kids be occupied. Our municipalities have to make sure that there's some kind of community center that is available for youth and something to do there in those community centers to keep them busy. The state of Connecticut has to make sure that they stop taking monies to stop the programs from being able to happen. That's a big thing I have some concern with as a legislator in the state of Connecticut. We don't fund the things that we need for people to stop saying that these things are happening all over Connecticut or all over the place. If we
Or
really want to make change, then fund the things that
funds
we
to things.
need to make those things change. Because a lot of legislators do this.
I know, I can tell you as a journalist, and I've written about this many times in columns. You have this big announcement. This program is going to do such and such and such, and you got X amount of dollars. And the following year, the money is run out for that
Mhm.
program, or it has been reduced. So you go from 10 people a staff to down to 5. But the
Yeah.
problem has grown bigger. I have seen this time and time again. I have seen men such as yourself, myself, involved with this stuff. And suddenly the money has run out, like Project Longevity. Some of that stuff works, some of it doesn't, but you
We're just
have to
gonna
do something.
we're about to pick that up in New London.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah,
I have to tell you, I thought the guys, I thought they did a really decent job. And it
yeah,
seems whenever these programs come around, if you don't get out of the gate and get it 100%, then it's not working.
yeah,
And
yeah.
as to those people who talk about the gun laws and it should be across the board, those are the same people who said the same thing about the black community and drugs until it hit the suburban area, and suddenly it was a whole different conversation. They were no longer junkies; they were
Mhm.
substance abuse users or
Yeah.
whatever.
And,
So
and and we try to have that discussion, but it becomes such an argument
I know.
because they
Oh,
don't understand the war against drugs and how it affected and infected our
infect.
folk, you
Ooh,
know. And for decades,
decades.
our folk went and have been in crisis and have been calling out for some kind of help. But as soon as it hit those towns where folk were talking about black and brown folk, now you can see there's a big change in
Yes.
that's involved. Same thing when they did the thing on marijuana becoming legal. Oh, okay. Now it's now you can make money on it. So
Now
now
you can make money on it, right? So
so so now for all those that were making money, okay, well let's let all those people out of jail. If they don't
I
have if they don't have violence behind what they were doing, or there's no secondary crime, let them all out.
let them all
Because
out
there's no reason for them to be in there because we're making now billions, millions to billions off of marijuana for the same thing.
for the same thing. And I've often told, in my discussions with other black people, I have told them, let me make something clear. I'm not going to any dispensary, and I'm not telling you to go to any dispensary that's owned by whites. If I'm going to buy marijuana, I'm going to go to a black owned dispensary because there's no way in the world, as I watch this stuff destroy our communities, there's no way in the world I'm going to go spend the money and make white America rich. And it just
And
didn't
that
make
that was that was a huge problem because initially I voted. I will say initially I voted against it because I didn't think there was enough parameters around it to
mm-hmm.
make sure that black and brown folk had
So
the advantage. And being a police officer, you don't really want to see something like that
Sure.
happen because we don't have enough educational mechanisms for our youth for that. And we're starting to see, you're starting to see that now.
And you're starting to see it. I see it on the bus. Every 13, 14, 50-year-olds, they sit there and roll marijuana, and it infuriates me because when I was coming up, there's no way in the world I would have sat there and done that with an adult, with an adult near me. But it is a problem, sir. So what can we do? Because we have passed these laws, and quite frankly, I'm in agreement. We should have passed the laws, but we do have youth that we have to be accountable to, and that we have to be able to support through, just like with alcohol, through their, through these teen years when, but everything around them is,
It all comes down to money.
it
It
all comes
literally
down to money.
comes down to funding. If now that we've done this, now we have to provide the funding that to go along with it. All the money that's made, not well, you can't say all of it. I would like to say all of it. I'm gonna just say all of it. The money that is made from marijuana, such a small percentage goes back to the brown and black community. There's a percentage, but I think it's a small percentage.
And that's why, to me, we need to get the message out and educate our people about where they need to spend their money if they're going to buy marijuana. It would just, and I'm an old guy, but it would just bother me if 10 years from now, and I'm still living, no blacks and brown people have benefited from this. If neighborhoods haven't changed, if communities haven't changed, then as far as I'm concerned, this whole thing would be a failure. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in order to do that, though, we need to get more information to brown and black people about this, because I'm all about the money part. I'm all about black and brown people spending as much money as they can with black and brown people. It is the only way, that
Mm-hmm.
we're going to rise up, so to speak, or some of us are going to rise up out of poverty. But anyway,
But
going back,
it becomes very black and brown people can't afford what it costs to get in the business of marijuana. And if you can, it's not to one of those grand stages of it, you
right,
know. And then, obviously, black and brown folk, there's a lot of black and brown folk that have had a criminal history that are, I call them professors in that field without education.
well,
They know, they know how to grow it. They
as I've
know
said,
how to bag it. They
they know
know
how to
how to
bag it.
get out of
They
it.
know how to sell it. They know how to
But
sell it.
they don't, but they don't allow the small sale so that they can make that money that they used to make when they got arrested for it.
And here comes the street corner dealer. And I was going to ask you that. We kind of veered away from gun violence, but the marijuana conversation is just as interesting. And what about the street corner dealer? Because now the dispensaries are, I guess they're in competition with the street
Yep.
corner dealer. And I know that in other parts of the United States, the street dealer
Mm-hmm.
is winning the
Yep.
battle.
So I
So
mean, to me, you can't. I might say there should be a different kind of license to sell it, where you can have someone from the community have a business, but they just have to have it. It still has to be governed by something.
yes,
You because we worry about things that get added to it.
sure.
You know, so it should have some checking mechanism. But if you happen, I mean, it's no different than a bodega.
Yeah, no, and we know that they sell it.
You
They've been
know,
selling marijuana for
but
years. I mean, you can
but
walk in
they're
any
minimizing.
bodega.
But you can't really sell it in a bodega like you can sell it in a dispensary.
Right, right. You can't sell it freely,
Right.
and everything is under the table. Yes,
So
and
I mean, if it's legal, I just don't see why you would not be able to sell it if you make the bodega streamline it just like everybody else, just
everybody
not
else.
as expensive. You know,
Do you
you're go ahead.
Do you find a correlation between marijuana and young people and gun violence?
Um, I haven't I haven't seen data. I've been told about it by um, professors at like UConn or someone who studies that kind of
Hmm.
field, but I have not seen data to say that because you smoke marijuana, you're going to go out there having some kind of gun issue.
Yeah, I don't
I'm
agree with that. I
I'm
don't
not,
think that's the case.
I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but I haven't seen anything that says because you smoked a blunt that's why he went out on a shooting spree.
Yes, but I do know that in my experience as a journalist, that seemed to be what was in the police report every time it came across my desk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and quite frankly, some of that stuff I just used to become outraged when I would read it because I didn't believe it. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're running out of time here. I kind of want to sum up your feelings on where we stand with gun violence and what you hope this new legislation that you guys push through does for the state. You want to wrap that up for me, please?
Well, it I've heard that it becomes a heavy burden on those who do not do things wrong. And I don't deny that it does. But the focus is to make sure that our streets are safer. And some of the mechanisms that are in here, I believe, do that. I think the unfortunate thing is that until we see some data from this now legislation that just passed, we're just catching up on the original data um, of, of, of the first legislation that passed in regards to gun laws. Now we're going to have to now get data from now these new gun laws, and until that happens, you really aren't able to tell where it falls at yet in regards to the different issues that we do have with gun violence. So we're hoping that um, you know, as soon as we get that data, that there will be some more discussion in regards to what to do next. Obviously, there is a lot of want to expand the assault weapons ban.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but again, you come up with a fight when you have those who do that as a sport.
Right. And responsibly.
And
If you had your druthers and there was going to be no debate, in other words, you were the man and what you said went. And if you had one thing that you think would help curb gun violence, what would it be?
I'd raise the age.
You raise the age. And right
Yeah.
now the age is 21, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you would raise the age more.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason for that would be
It just and talking with a lot of the youth that I talk to, young adults, a lot of young adults don't are saying that was a request from a lot of young adults first, because they say you know um, people aren't ready for guns even at that age, I push back at them because I say yeah, but we expect you to join the military at what age?
at 18,
We allow you to drink at what age?
21. But I try to press upon people that when we talk about, when they talk about these men in the military and on the front lines, you're talking about those kids you see, those 18-year-old boys with their pants hanging down. Those are the men and the soldiers that you're reading about. So, these are young men. That you plug them off the street, put them in dangerous situations, and it becomes a whole different ball game. Well,
Yeah.
sir, I do appreciate you taking the time to come on. I know that you were busy right there at the end of the session and so forth. So I do appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything you want to add before we leave here?
I think the next things to for us to work on is obviously the juvenile justice. Kids being incarcerated instead of um, some kind of diversionary program. We worked on that quite a bit this year. We put out some good legislation. So if you get a chance to read up on HB 6888.
Okay, and that's the juvenile justice thing. We'll do
Yeah,
that.
with the
Yeah, I
JJ.
will do that because I am very much interested in that, and I'm interested in knowing maybe, and we don't have time to get into this, but maybe when I was a kid and I was a trouble kid, we had Job Corps, and
Yep.
that was one of the things that we had. And I went to Job Corps. I'm wondering if we can bring back things such as that because it got me away from, my neighborhood, so to speak, and it got me away from my element. Actually, I went out to Utah. So
But those are the type of diversionary programs that we talk about in that bill. We need more of those.
yes, we do.
And we need, a lot of people. I got a little bit of pushback, but I said we need to start prepping our kids to go in the military too.
Yeah, I know. I 100% agree. I went into the military. I'm a veteran, and it has served me well to this day. But the big thing was I got away. I was
That's
able
a
to
good thing.
experience other things, other people. I was able to, expand you know, my mental process and so forth. I was just able to just leave that neighborhood and find and discover life, so to speak, and find
Yep.
that, there were a lot of Black people who were doing well, which I didn't know at the time, but
Mhm.
there were Black people that were doing well. So I think you're right. I think we need to expand more of those programs, and we need more of those. And let's get you back on the show, and we'll talk about juvenile justice next time, if
That
that's
would be
okay
great.
with you.
Definitely, definitely. That would be great.
You've been listening to Real Talk, Real People. If you would like to be on the show, if you have an idea for the show, give us a call at 203-605-1859 or drop us an email at realtalkrealpeoplect@gmail.com. You folks have a good week, and we'll talk again next week.
Dead Windows, the new book by James Snowden Walker. Available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Google Books.